Hello, and welcome back to Kester's Forest. Now this week, I thought I'd take a look at an item that I managed to pick up from Japan in one of my Sendico deliveries. I'm talking about the Panasonic 3DO. Now growing up, of course, I didn't own a 3DO. I didn't play on one, I don't think, and I only ever really saw them in magazines or on the TV in shows like Bad Influence and Games Master. And they were, of course, extremely expensive. I think in the UK, they launched at around about the price of £600, which, you know, when you think about a Super Nintendo going for about £150, it was just really no contest. There was no way I was ever going to afford one. But funnily enough, I actually never really liked the look of the games either. I mean, it was supposed to be extremely powerful. The name implies 3D, there were some 3D graphics, but, you know, they just kind of didn't really appeal to me, and I was never really that bothered. But when I managed to get this one from Japan, and hopefully I can get it working, it only cost me around about £40. I mean, it didn't come with a controller, so I managed to get one of those for £10. And of course, I do have to add shipping onto that as well, but once you bundle it all in, and if you collect your items together like I do, you know, these things really come out around about £5 a piece in shipping, which really isn't that bad. So I got myself a console, I got myself a controller, I got myself a game. Let's see if I can't get this thing working, play some games, and see if I really have been missing out on the 3DO all these years. Let's take a look. So once I've plugged in my adapter and my composite leads, it's time to fire this thing up and see if it even works at all. And yes, we got power, we've got a boot screen, so off to a good start, I'd say. But obviously I'm not entirely sure yet whether it even plays games, because my main concern here is the CD drive. So I did buy myself a PAL game, it's Starblade, and the 3DO is multi-region, so this should, in theory, play straight away. Nope, it doesn't like that, but that's not a surprise. I did think maybe this is what was going to happen. And as you can see, it's got this fancy overlong, I've actually reduced the length of this boot screen in title sequence animation thing that it has, and while I ejected and put it back in and ejected and put it back in, I did eventually manage to get something to happen so that, you know, the game is actually now playing. But as you can see, it's extremely choppy and stuttery. So obviously the machine itself doesn't have much RAM and it's playing straight off the disk, and so therefore reading speed is really important here if you're going to get any enjoyment out of these games whatsoever. So as anticipated, I'm going to have a little look at the CD drive. So let's take it apart and see what we find. Now there's actually a fair bit to getting access to the mechanical side of the drive itself, and whilst trying to take this apart, one of the screws just did not want to come out, so unfortunately I did have to drill it out. And as you can see, I left the CD in, which probably wasn't the best idea, but as you'll see later on, it didn't really affect the play of it. But yeah, managed to get that out, and then no big deal replacing that with a different screw. So what we've got to do then is just remove the top plate here, which is holding the disc, and then flip the whole drive over to remove the circuit board from underneath, which will then eventually give you access to the rest of the drive. Pulling it out of the metal chassis just requires a few more screws, and then yep, you can lift it up and see the mechanical side of the drive itself. So there's the worm cog, I guess it's called, and the motor. I put a bit of IPA in this switch here, which is kind of the sort of back end switch that stops it from moving too far forward. And as you can see, there's grease in here, but it looks a bit, it's not dried, but it looks a bit sticky and a bit sludgy, and it's probably not helping matters. So I thought I might just take the whole thing out, give it a bit of a clean, and then replace it with some nice silicone grease. And I'm just giving the lens itself a bit of a clean too. It did actually look okay, but no harm in giving it a clean while I'm in here. So that's the worm screw that I've just removed, and giving that a nice clean down with some alcohol, and then I'm going to replace the grease. And then we'll put it all back together again. And while I'm here, no harm in adding a little bit of grease to the rails there, and I'm also adding some sewing machine oil to these spinning cogs, the spindles I guess, to allow that to move a little more freely. I find that works really well. So plugging it back in and putting it back together again, we can give that a new test and see if it's done anything to the playability of this game. And unfortunately we're back to where we were before, it's just not playing. I took the top off the player so I could have a look, and as you can see the disc itself is spinning up and the laser is also trying to find the track, so there is power getting to the laser. I gave it a little tweak with the potentiometer and tuned it, and I did eventually manage to get the game to play again. And as you can see, it's now playing at the right speed. It's not choppy, it's not stuttery like it was before. So this is great. It's a bonus. But I do only own the one game because 3DO games are very expensive, and my intention here is to try and play some burn games because there's no copy protection on the 3DO. Now I'm using my trusted brand here verbatim, but I did actually try a bunch of different brands to burn and play in this machine, and absolutely it was a no-go. Nothing played whatsoever. The only thing I could get it to play was my single copy of Starblade, which obviously is great. I'm really happy with that. It's an okay game, but really I wanted to explore the library a little bit, and that's really not going to cut it. So unfortunately, although I'm having fun with Starblade, I am going to have to try and pursue this a little bit further and see if I can't find another way to get this to play burned games. Now, in preparation for this, I did kind of anticipate that the drive wouldn't work at all, and although that could be down to the laser, it could also be down to the power. I had heard that the capacitors on the power supply on the 3DO are a little bit unreliable. Now, the ones I have in here actually looked okay, but I had brought myself a replacement set, so I thought, why not just replace them anyway and see how we get on, because, you know, maybe the laser itself isn't getting quite enough power to read those burned discs. As I say, everything actually looked okay, so I don't think the capacitors really were having any effect at all, but there was a little bit of corrosion on some of the contacts, so I gave them a scrape and a clean, and then put the new ones in anyway. And this is where I hit a bit of a snag. There was no power at all, which is weird, because obviously these are new capacitors, and it was working just fine before, so what's going on? I sort of traced the fault to the fact that this fuse had then blown as soon as I put the new caps in. And checking the AC input, you can see that it's actually supplying 19 volts, and I believe it's supposed to be supplying 16. But I'm going to assume that that is actually the correct amount because it's not turned on yet, and once it starts pulling power, that will probably drop somewhat. Now, I was going to do this anyway, so I bought a UK power supply, and I'm then going to swap that out and make sure that I can then plug this straight into the wall without having to use the power adapter for Japanese to UK power supplies. It doesn't quite fit, so I had to get the old Dremel out and just make a little bit more room, but I didn't have to do too much damage to the case. And as you can see, this transformer is now fitting in quite nicely. And looking at the schematics, it needs to be wired up a certain way. Now what I did here was I tried to reuse the sort of strain relief for the new plug, and I thought I might melt my way through and cause it to be a little bit wider, and made an absolute pig's ear of it, as you could see. But putting a bit of shrink wrap on there, it actually ended up looking okay. And then I set to wiring the transformer up to supply the correct voltage from a UK plug. Now obviously I'm going to need to find a way to plug this new transformer directly into the board, so I'm just clipping off the plug from the old Japanese transformer and then reattaching it to the new one. bit of heat shrink, and we're away. Unfortunately though, when I did plug it back in, I noticed that the power was disconnecting and it was making basically a poor connection to the board. So I tested the continuity of the plug itself, and that seemed okay. And I also then tested the other end of the plug to the transformer itself, and that was also coming out okay. So the only thing I could think was that there was something wrong with the pins themselves, these little miniature plugs that go on the prongs, and I decided to just give them a clean and then bend them out to make them maybe a little bit tighter, make a little bit of a better contact with the pins on the board. So putting it all back together, a quick test, and yes, we're back in business. And unfortunately, although it didn't make anything worse, it didn't help with the problem I had reading burnt discs. So my next option was to buy a replacement laser from AliExpress, which I'm going to try and install now. So I'm just removing this solder blob from the ribbon cable, which you have to do. It's kind of like a protection for static electricity, I think, when they transport it. So I dropped that into the mechanism and put it in the machine. And as you can see, it's, well, it's not doing anything. Taking the disc out and trying it without, you can see that the laser is trying to find a disc. It is working, and I did a bit of tuning again with the potentiometer like I did before, and I did enough to manage to get the disc to actually spin up. But no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I really just could not get it to read anything at all, not even my original copy of Starblade. So I turned my attention once again to AliExpress, and I took a gamble on this ODE, which has been made based on a Raspberry Pi Pico. Looking in the small print here, it advises you to copy some boot software from a guy called Fixel's homepage. So that's what I did. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that in fact what they've done is they've essentially just cloned somebody else's hardware and put it on a Raspberry Pi Pico, and then have essentially directed people to use his software. So I think at some point I'm going to have to find a way to remedy that, because I'm not a big fan of ripping people off and copying their stuff. I did look on his website to see how much it would actually cost to buy one of his drives officially, and they are considerably more expensive. And much as I'm interested in playing a 3DO, I'm not interested enough to fork out that kind of money. I just want to, for the sake of this video, just get a few games running to see what I'm missing out on, and then if I really like it, I might try upgrading. I also don't actually know whether this thing is going to work at all, because, you know, it is cheap. It has come from AliExpress and probably won't last more than 5 minutes. But let's find out. So to prevent any shorts from the casing, I'm just going to put some electrical tape on the back there, and then put this whole thing back together and see if it works at all. But before we power it back on, I thought actually it might be an opportunity just to give this a bit of a clean, although it actually arrived in pretty good condition. It is a bit dirty, a little bit dusty, so, you know, I might as well while I'm here. I mean, it's come up pretty well, although there are a few blemishes on the front. I will try and address that later, but all in all, looking pretty good. There we go, first time. Okay, this is cool. I actually grabbed a few more games and put them on the root of the drive here, and I'm going to go through now and just try out a few 3DO games and see what I think.
me. Show me control and discipline. Without them, you won't stand a chance against the Empire. Do I make myself clear?
I'm not sure why I fired this one up first, but it's actually one of the few games that I have actually played already, although that's because this isn't exclusive to the 3DO. And yeah, it's kind of on the rails shooter. I think most people are familiar with it by now, but it kind of sums up the early 90s aesthetic of sort of 3D or pseudo 3D games for me. Super Street Fighter 2 was supposed to be the way to play this game at home on a console, and I never got a chance to play it, and it's a really, really good version. The music's great, the controls are really tight, but I'm not really liking the control pad. Another cool thing about this particular Japanese version of the 3DO is that it has S-Video out, but also this switch at the back, which takes it from 480i to 240p. And I'm trying to show you here, zoomed in on my CRT monitor, the difference, but it does make it a bit sharper. I don't know, it's personal preference, I guess, but I quite like it. So yeah, pretty happy to have that, at least as an option. Now, a game that comes up quite often when you ask people what should I play on a 3DO is this version of Road Rash, and yeah, it's really good. It's sort of got that 3D photorealistic look to it, but also some absolutely hilarious full motion video. So yeah, kind of fun to see someone being kicked in the nuts there. And another one I've heard quite a lot of positive things about is Gex, and this is it's a platformer using some pre-rendered graphics. But yeah, once I got used to it, I actually really liked the controls on this game, and it was kind of fun. It had a bit of a sense of humour to it. It's not amazing, but I really liked it. So yeah, definitely worth checking out on the system. And this last one here is called Return Fire. Now, I hadn't really heard anything about this game whatsoever, but on looking on a few lists and forums and YouTube videos of recommendations, a lot of people pointed me towards this, and yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. It's a good fun. The graphics aren't exactly anything to write home about, but yeah, definitely worth checking out. When I think about the 3DO, at least when I did, this game, Rise of the Robots, is the one that kept popping into my mind, and I've never actually played it, and I'm glad I haven't played it because it is absolutely rubbish. And then this game, Crash and Burn, really needed to maybe up the budget on the costumes there for the live action actors because they looked atrocious. The game itself was okay, but honestly, it's pretty boring. So there you have it, the Panasonic 3DO. Now, while I was putting this together, I kind of remembered the games that I saw running on it back in the day when I was a kid, and they were Rise of the Robots and Crash and Burn. And of course, those games are, now that I've actually got to play them, truly awful, which is probably why I wasn't really that fussed about the 3DO in the first place. If that's all I saw, I probably wasn't going to get a very good impression of the system. But I did really enjoy the version of Super Street Fighter 2 that we got on there. I did really enjoy Road Rash. That's an excellent... I mean, the graphics on that are kind of funny because they're sort of photorealistic but still running in an extremely low resolution, the kind you would get in the early 90s. And I really enjoyed Return Fire, which is, to me, a kind of mix of Desert Strike and a game I really enjoy on the N64 called Blast Corps. I'm definitely going to go back and play a bit more of that. So what did we do? Well, we recapped the machine to make sure that it's going to last for another few years, and I replaced the Japanese power supply with one from the UK so that I can now plug it directly into the mains without using an adapter. I never really trust those adapters. I never really feel that safe using them. And of course, above all else, we did replace the CD drive with an ODE drive. Now, I do need to stress that I didn't buy that ODE from an official site by the guy that kind of created the hardware for that. I did buy a clone version from AliExpress. The price difference is really quite striking. We're going from sort of £200 down to about £40, However, I am going to find a way to compensate him for the software that I ended up using because that is directly taken from his site. He has made it freely available to everybody, but nevertheless, I do feel like he's not making any money out of me and something really sort of needs to happen there. So I will be doing that. But how about you? What are your favourite 3DO games? What games should I be looking out for to try out? I'm really looking for something that's kind of exclusive to the system that didn't really make its way over to, the PS1
or the PC, or a game that's just definitely much better on the 3DO than anywhere else. I kind of suspect that the list isn't too long, but I'd like to be proved wrong. Anyway, that's all for this week. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time on Kester's Forest.